Okay. Now, one thing, the communist nations were proud that their countries excelled in sports. In 1960, the Soviet Union won the Olympics. East Germans runners usually did really well. But inside the communist countries, your books will say women were not treated as equals. They had to work long hours and were expected to be wives and mothers, in spite of the fact that they were working long hours also. They're expected to come home, clean the house, and serve as wife and mother. I'm not going to write the name down, but Boris Pasternak was one of the leading Soviet writers at the time, and she wrote against what was going on. Now, after Brezhnev, in 1985, Gorbachev was chosen, and folk have already mentioned how that the Soviet Union, to be a mild-mannered man and to be a reformer, was dangerous. Gorbachev was chosen to lead the Soviet Union in 1985. He was young, 54, which, I mean, okay, when you're my age, that's young, 54 years old. They called these older people, I mean, Brezhnev lived to be an old man. They called it a gerontocracy. In other words, a rule by old men. Khrushchev was an old man, and Brezhnev lived long enough to become old. Gorbachev is still alive, but under him, the Soviet Union only lasted about 5 years. But he moved up rapidly. He saw a need for reform. He realized that central planning had to be abandoned. In other words, basically, the Soviet Union had to become more like the West, more capitalistic. And the Soviet Union had excelled in space exploration, but nothing else. In other words, they had sent the first dog into orbit, but didn't bring back. They had sent the first human into orbit. By the way, I remind you, it was 50 years ago today, I remember it. 3 men, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin, got on board a space capsule headed for the moon. The blast off occurred on July 16th, 1969. I had just turned 20. But anyway, the Soviets had excelled in space exploration, but they had not excelled in miniaturization. In other words, while the West was learning how to build smaller and smaller integrated circuits and cram more and more sophistication into a smaller space, and you may not realize this phone that you carry around has hundreds of thousands of transistors in it, all crammed into a really, really small space. The Soviet Union did not develop any of that. They lagged behind in the production of computers, both for public use and personal use. Their standard of living was declining already. All right, Gorbachev visited Canada, and he saw how much more productive Canadian farmers were than Soviet farmers, and he said, we've got to get our people producing as much as the Canadians do. One year of Gorbachev's term in office, 1986 was the year, a big nuclear accident occurred at Chernobyl. Now, folk, if you see an American nuclear power plant, they are designed to where if they explode, they're going to collapse on themselves. If you ever see a building that looks like this, you might think it might be a nuclear power plant. They're designed in such a way that if they, again, they're going to collapse on and cover up. Well, at Chernobyl, they didn't have that. Now, I understand Chernobyl has been capped by a huge dome, maybe the biggest dome I believe ever built in the world, but they've got a huge dome around the Chernobyl reactor. And today, you can go into Chernobyl, but you can't stay long. Wildlife has returned to Chernobyl and apparently is thriving. They said that, well, first it would take 600 to 900 years before Chernobyl could be lived in again. Well, it might not take that long. But anyway, a big accident occurred at Chernobyl. The nuclear radiation leaked into some Western European countries, but not enough to hurt them. As a result of this accident, the Soviet Union was told that they must report things like this to the rest of the world every time it happened, because before this time, things like this were not reported. It was believed they had a big moon rocket one time that, I mean, our satellites were watching it. They watched the moon rocket from space, and all of a sudden a gray spot appeared in the photographs. Well, yeah, what's the meaning of this gray spot? And they wouldn't tell us till much later. The gray spot was where this rocket exploded, blown to bits, and set their space program back several years. But in other words, a big nuclear accident occurred, and this time they were required to report it because the radiation was leaking into the neighbor countries of Finland and Sweden. Gorbachev allowed a second party to form, two-party system, but this party voted him out of office. Gorbachev's reforms, not enough for some, too much for others. He pleased no one in the Soviet Union. The West thought he was popular. A lot of us thought that he was going to bring about the true peace between our country and his. Gorbachev, like Khrushchev, was finally deposed, but unlike Khrushchev, the people of Russia rose up and got rid of the dissenters. But then finally, some of those satellite countries saw themselves as being able to get independence. They sensed the weakness. So Lithuania was the first one. Lithuania declared itself independent in 1990 in March. Latvia and Estonia followed. And then the Soviet Union began to break up. By the end of 1991, where there had been a Soviet Union, there are now 16 republics. 16 independent countries, that is. Gorbachev resigned as head of the Soviet Union, which no longer existed, and turned everything over to Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin. The new leader of Russia after Yeltsin is Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin remains in power even though there's rumors that his health is beginning to deteriorate. Russia is fighting a long war against Chechnya, trying to bring Chechnya back under Russian rule. Russia also is determined to get the Crimea back. Khrushchev gave the Crimea to Ukraine, but the people in Crimea say they don't want to be part of Ukraine. They want to be joined with Russia again. So that's created tensions with the West. And that's where we are right now. Russia's fighting the West again. Russia's fighting Chechnya.
You said Crimea wants to be reunited with
Crimea wants to go back to Russia. See, Crimea was once part of Russia. Khrushchev gave it to the Ukraine because Khrushchev himself was a Ukrainian. So Khrushchev gave it to Ukraine, but now Russia wants it back and the Ukrainians want it back, and I personally would like to see the United States stay out of it. And let them decide themselves. All right. Now, when Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and the other nations, the Soviet Union broke up, immediately the Western countries, like Poland, where your book talks about Poland first, then Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, all of these countries began to break away from Russia until the Russians get out of our country and go home. Your book mentions Poland first. One thing that worked in Poland's favor, the Catholic Church elected a Polish pope. Poland formed a labor union, Solidarity, which they still have. But as Poland's economic problems worsened, the Polish government eventually made concessions to the Union. Poland finally had free elections of the first in a communist country had in 40 years. Lech Walesa became president of Poland. I'm not going to write the name down, but Lech Walesa was the Union head. basically a union head, was elected president of Poland. Poland today is a divided country with numerous political parties, cannot decide which way it's going, and they have very large unemployment. Regrettably, folk, this has been a lot of Poland's history throughout its existence. Number of political parties and doesn't know which direction it's going to take, disunited. Looks big on a map, but they've never been really particularly powerful. All right, Hungary. Hungary was a nation that revolted in 1956. Again, make a long story short, in 1980 they held free elections in Hungary. Communism was defeated. I remember when they made world news when the people of Hungary were told, you no longer have to call each other comrade. In other words, before this time, I'd have to address you as comrade, or you'd address me as Comrade Cunningham. Comrade was like the church people saying brother or sister. Some churches call each other brother or sister. And if you go to a union meeting, they call each other brother and sister. You've been to union meetings yourself. I went to several when I was at Lockheed. And they call each other brother Stamey or sister such and such. But anyway, the communists would call each other comrade. Well, this practice was eventually outlawed. All right. Czechoslovakia, again, they had been crushed in 1968, but they finally told the Soviet Union to go home. Dissent against communism. In 1989, communism collapsed in Czechoslovakia. But the nation of Czechoslovakia had a difficult time forming a new government, and finally it split in two. In 1993, two countries were formed, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Today, Czechoslovakia is one of those countries that does not exist anymore. It's now Slovakia or the Czech Republic. And right at the moment, one of my daughters has a boyfriend who's temporarily in Slovakia. I had a pupil from Czechoslovakia one time who kind of took offense at the story I told, but the story went like this. Some American missionaries went to Czechoslovakia, and the Czech people were showed off a refrigerator that the whole community had bought. They'd all chipped in, and they put this refrigerator in a warehouse where they could all use. They were so proud of this new refrigerator they bought, and not one American had the heart to tell them, hey, we have two of these in every American home. Which probably is your case. You might have. We have three of them in my house. 3 working refrigerators. But they took the whole community to buy one, and they were so proud of it. But anyway, we have 2 countries in Europe have told the world that they're not going to take any more Middle Easterners. They are Slovakia and Poland. All right, Germany. When the Soviet Union was collapsing and all these countries within and without the Soviet Union were splitting off, the communist government finally took down the Berlin Wall and opened the border with West Berlin. A popular election was held. The Christian Democrats won it. Essentially, the new government said East and West Germany will unite. So, West Germany and East Germany were united in October of 1990. Now, I've mentioned how that the German people are generally industrious, but reunification proved to be difficult for Germany. West Germany was prosperous and East Germany not. And East Germany was using their own mark, and West Germany had its mark. All right, here's what they said. They told the East German, if you'll give us your marks, we'll give you our marks, we'll trade your marks equally 1 to 1. It would be like our country asking some of the poor folk, give us your pennies and we'll give you dollars, and face the pennies. Because the East German currency was worth that little. It turned out that sent shockwaves throughout all of Europe's economy, because the East Germans never did catch up to the West Germans. The East Germans had lived for 45 years under communism, where they expected to be taken care of. and they simply were not as industrious as their West German counterparts. And Germany has had a struggle with that from that day till this. Almost 30 years have gone by since Germany united. Well, yeah, and Julia, when Germany united, they promised the world, we're not going to try to take back the territory we lost in World War II. That territory we had to give to Poland, Poland can keep, and so far they've kept that promise. But Germany has had problems reuniting. Money problems, economic problems, problems with trying to bring up the Easterners to the west side. Well, the United States since Russia, it's now Russia, folk. It was the Soviet Union for years, but it's Russia again since 1990. The United States and Russia decided to reduce military spending so we signed arms reduction treaties. This was, for all practical purposes, the end of the Cold War. We thought it would lead to a permanent peace between the U.S. and Russia, but it didn't happen. Russia began to try to get Chinyeka back, and then Russia began to try to take take territory from Ukraine, take the Crimea, so take the Crimea back. And all told, there is more trouble between the United States and Russia now than there was in 1990. The fact of the matter is, Russia is now a second-rate country, and probably will continue to be. And there are only two superpowers left, the United States and China. And they're somewhat at odds with each other. All right. Now, another country we'll talk about is Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia is somewhat unique. Yugoslavia contained a lot of Eastern Orthodox Christians and a lot of Muslims, and then communism moved in and took over. The leader's name was Tito. Tito was a very able leader, apparently, and he was able to keep all the sides, the Christians, the Muslims, and the communists working together in some kind of harmony. And oh yes, Yugoslavia produced the only communist-made automobile that ever sold in the United States, the Yugo.
I remember the Yugo.
You own the Yugo one?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, the Yugo. There was a song made about it, in my Yugo. Yeah, there was a song about the Yugo. But the Yugo, see, the thing about it is the other cars made under communism were crummy. The Yugo might have been the best car made under communism, but it was not really, it was generally not equal to the cars made in the West.
No, they weren't. But they were, back in the day, they were like, everybody was getting like Yugos.
Yeah, there were a lot of them. So they sold a bunch
It was
of
like
them.
around the 80s, early 80s, 70s, 79?
Yeah, 70s, late 70s,
yeah.
late 70s, yeah.
And I was like a junior
And
high.
I saw a lot of them. Today, again, they did not last.
They were very popular cars. I mean, it's because
Yeah.
they were relatively
They were cheap.
affordable. They were cheap.
They were cheap, and they were cheap on gasoline.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they were affordable. And but they were not as well built as cars made in Japan or cars
Right.
made in the United States or cars made in Europe. And they're the only cars made in the Soviet Union did not sell in the United States at all.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because the Soviet Union produced more than its share of lemons.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all of you know what I mean by lemon, I guess. A lemon is a car that proves to be bad once you get it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyway. But anyway, Yugo was the only car that was made while Tito was president. Anyway, Tito did not last forever. Tito died, and Yugoslavia split up. And it fragmented. But it went back to the old nations before World War I. Serbia became its own independent country. Serbia, now, the nations began fighting each other, particularly the Muslim countries and the Christian countries. And into this scenario stepped Milosevic, M-I-L-O-S-O-V-E-C. Here's what the story of Milosevic, folk. And if I had been in his shoes, I might have done the same thing. The Muslims engaged in terroristic activities. Okay, like they sometimes do. The Muslims became terrorists, so he went in and did some what he called ethnic cleansing. He was going to completely rid his part of Europe of all Muslims, so he practiced what we call genocide. They would just kill everyone who's Muslim. He brought the whole world down on him. He was eventually captured and taken to court for trial. While awaiting trial, he contracted cancer and died of cancer without ever having to face trial. Again, you can decide for yourself, was he on the right or not? But again, he did it because the Muslims were practicing terrorism, and he thought he'd retaliate by just simply going in and killing them all. The conflict goes all the way back to the 1400s and 1500s and 1600s when Islam made inroads into Eastern Europe. Today, the Muslims living in what used to be Yugoslavia are mostly nominal Muslims anyway, just like all of Europe. Europe has become religiously very indifferent. It's been said the average European goes to church 3 times in his life. Once to be christened when he's born, then to get married, and then when he dies. That's not part of his life. He's carried there to have his funeral. When Europeans, only 2% of Christian Europeans ever attend church on Sunday. Anyway, the United Nations did not want to become involved in the conflict, so NATO decided to try to bring about peace. President Clinton sent in troops to try to stop Milosevic. Basically, President Clinton was fighting on the side of Muslims against Christians. There is no solution that seems to be in sight. You don't hear much about that conflict here of late, but it's still going on. Milosevic has died. All right. Now, China. Any help you want to give is welcome. China was finally at peace in 1949. Yeah, the year I was born. I'm a 49er now. China was at peace. So Mao decided to try to run a moderate course towards socialism. So he wanted to bring about socialism slowly so as not to alienate the peasants. He called his program the New Democracy. It looked like it was a success at first. But, oh yeah, now, folk, a lot of peasants received farms. Now, folk, this is something that some of you might have a hard time understanding. There have been several times in history when governments have moved in, taken lands from the rich, and given these lands to the poor. It has never, ever worked that I know of, even one time. Excuse me. Mexico did it south of us. Korea did it. Mao did it. Take lands from the rich and redistribute these lands among the poor, and somehow or another, folk. Now, when Russia, in the 1860s, freed its serfs, they made the serfs pay for their land, and gave the serfs 40 years to pay for their land. But just outright give the land, somehow or another, that just does not work. A lot of people who had been given land lost it. Many were executed, and Mao himself later admitted that a lot of the people that he killed had not committed any crime. A bloodbath went on in China. Farms then were collectivized. In other words, the whole community, or the state owned a lot of the farmland. That's collective farming. The state owns the farmland, and everybody works the farmland, turns the produce into the state, and the state redistributes it. Here's the result. This is the same thing that happened in Russia. Mao got an experiment called the Great Leap Forward. In other words, we're going to make a big jump forward here. Millions of people died. It was,
what was that, the Great Leap Forward, what was that about, you said?
the Great Leap Forward was where that Mayo was going to push his people towards riches and prosperity. Great leap, and do it rather abruptly all at once.
Okay.
It created a lot of large rural communes, but the plan was a disaster. Now, here, folk, is what I remember reading about when I was a senior in high school. And I'm thinking this would have been me if I had been born in China. Mayo organized the young people, people my age, people high school age, persons who should have been preparing for a career or learning a trade. He organized them as Red Guards. The Red Guards went around killing everybody who disagreed with them, went around stealing everything. They caused a lot of misery and destruction in China. To this day, the Chinese call the people of my generation the waste generation. When they should have been learning a trade, they went around brutalizing people. Mayo published a little red book. The little red book said this is the book, basically had all the power that the Bible has to Christians. The little red book, I'm not going to write that down, but basically it was to supersede all other sources of learning. Everybody who disagreed was purged. The situation was compared to the reign of terror in France during the Revolution. No one was safe from the Red Guard, even loyal Maoist communists. The terror lasted throughout the 60s and up until the 70s. It finally ended when Mayo died in 1976. Mao Zedong died of Lou Gehrig's disease, as I understand. If any of you know anything about Lou Gehrig's disease, it paralyzes a person and there was no cure. Even in the United States, there was nothing that could be done for him. Today, there's a little bit that can be done for a person for a short time, but it's a disease that attacks the motor nerves and renders a person helpless. Yes.
Sir, you know, this sounds like so long ago, but for me, it doesn't feel so long ago.
Likewise.
Because in 1976, I was 14. So
Yeah.
I was in junior high, getting ready to go to high school.
Yeah.
And so when I think back, like if I just go back in my mind and I just think back, during my lifetime, this was really going on. And you know, living in the United States, not being affected
We were
by this,
unaware.
like I
That
didn't
is
know.
what Solzhenitsyn complained about in American young people. You don't know what's going on.
I didn't know
You
what
don't
was going on.
care.
I would have no
Okay.
idea that this kind of
Yeah.
behavior was going on over there. I mean, I
Yeah.
had no idea. I mean, you know, because you think, oh, well, maybe they're living like we're living. I mean, they just have maybe their own culture or their own food or their own way of life, but you don't know.
That the Red
This type
Guard
of
was
stuff
going
is
around
happening.
terrorizing,
Right.
stealing everything. Right. And again, that's what Solzhenitsyn criticized for, that the American youth just weren't the least bit interested. But he said he understood because we live in a peaceful country and there's a lot of trees and a lot of mountains and and we just simply are not aware. Whereas in Europe, the enemy is in sight. I mean, there's right across that hill over there, there's enemy territory.
Right.
And we don't have that here.
We don't have that
Yes.
here.
Okay, go ahead.
My mom and my dad, they born in 1969. In 1976, they are both in elementary school. And that time, my father told me at the day that Mao's dead, the teacher just came into the classroom and said, Mao's dead. Everybody must cry.
Oh. Yeah.
They
Well-
force you to cry.
Well, I heard one time that when Stalin entered the room one time, everybody started clapping, and they all clapped for 11 hours. The first person got tired and keeled over, he was put in a concentration camp. After 11 hours of clapping. Because he quit clapping before the rest of them did, that's all.
Yeah.
Again, folks, this is egomania for you. Now, what the Chinese did book. It's called Using a Scapegoat. All right, if any of you know anything about Jewish theology, the scapegoat was a goat. They would lay the blame for all their sins on this goat and banish the goat from the camp. And you might say, why didn't they try to bear the weight of their own sins? Okay, none of us can. So we need a scapegoat. All of us do. So the Jews had this scapegoat. Well, when the